YouTube viewers, I would like to begin today's video with a very simple question for you all. What's better than one superhero? That's right, two superheroes. This is a truth that Marvel has always understood pretty well. The concept of the double hero story comic has been around as long as the company. Hell, they had a series literally called Marvel 2-in-1 for a while. But there is perhaps no more literal application of the 2-in-1 name than Infinity Warps. Infinity Warps is simple at its core. This event shows us a version of the Marvel Universe where every two dudes are actually one dude. What if Iron Man and Thor were the same person? What if Scarlet Witch and Wolverine were the same person? And so on and so forth. If you think it gets crazy, oh boy, to those of you who have not read this event, I guarantee you it somehow gets even wilder than you think. In today's video, I am going to be going over every resident of the Infinity Warps universe, simply known as Warp World. Now, Warp World is a relatively new thing and hasn't been in that many comics, only 29 in total, and that's counting cameos and teaser appearances. So how many Infinity Warps characters could there really be for me to, oh my god. Okay, so there's like 85 of these things. Well, I already promised it, so I guess that's what we're doing. Fortunately for both me and you watching, 85 Infinity Warps is actually not as many as it sounds. It is still a lot, but only 5 of them actually get title role starring comics. A handful of others are sidekicks and villains, and many more of them are one-off appearances or a secret third thing that I will talk about towards the end of the video. So while there are 85, it's not like this is gonna take me hours. Still, that is a lot, so I should really get moving. Let me cut this intro short. Without further ado, let's talk about the Infinity Warps, beginning with how all this nonsense happened in the first place. The first thing we need to establish, Infinity Warps is actually canon, and amazingly, it's not multiverse canon. This is not a weird what-if series. This was something that was happening in the main Marvel Universe in the mainline books, at least by technicality. As you can kind of tell by the logo, Infinity Warps was not a crossover event by itself. Rather, it was a unique thing that I've never seen before, a sort of sub-event, part of a larger crossover simply called Infinity Wars without the P in there. Now, I'm not going to go into a full summary of Infinity Wars here because I have enough on my hands with just Warps as it is, plus I've already talked about it a little bit in my deep dive video on the Infinity Stones, but I'll give you the baseline information that you need. Infinity Wars follows Gamora, daughter of Thanos and usually Hero, but not in this case. See, in the lead up to Infinity Wars, Gamora had gone a little bit insane and decided to follow in her father's footsteps, gathering the Infinity Stones and using them to reduce all life in the universe by half. However, she was not quite as evil as Thanos, and wasn't just going to snap away half the life into dust. She took a different approach to dividing everybody by 2, and, well, you already heard what the concept of the event was, so you can take a guess. Gamora's master plan involved fusing every 2 souls into 1 soul, creating a combined universe that did technically have half the population size of the previous one. She created this new reality inside of the Soul Stone, overwriting its natural pocket dimension of Soul World into a replica of the existing universe, which would become known as Warp World. The residents of Warp World had full histories within their new existences. Nobody inside of Warp World knew that they had been altered. They all had their own memories and origins of backstories of the fused reality, and nobody was aware that they were a fusion, at least not at first. Now, Gamora's plan would turn a little bit more evil later. Her ultimate goal was to feed the fused warp world to a reality-devouring monster named Devondra who would remake the universe, which is a crazy concept to just drop in the first, 2 or 3 minutes of this video, but that is more part of Wars, not Warps. And like I said, I already addressed it in my Infinity Stones video, so I'm gonna focus on the warped stuff. This odd dynamic leaves us with the sub-event. While the main plotline was happening with Gamora during the Infinity Wars comic, Marvel was also putting out these side books under the Infinity Warps label, which were telling the stories of these fused characters as their histories went in the altered universe. These books are purely for fun and operate almost entirely on rule of cool logic. They are told primarily through a kind of unique format, what I'll call two-shot comics. They're not single issues, but they also aren't a full miniseries, which is usually 4 to 6 issues. Instead, it was 10 issues in 5 pairs, each pair focusing on a different character. The first two-shot, I guess I am going with that term, under the Infinity Warps branding was Soldier Supreme, starring the fusion of Captain America and Doctor Strange. Soldier Supreme begins more on the Captain America side of things, starting off in World War II and following a young Steven Rogers, because both halves of the fusion are named Steven, so the name is still just Steve Rogers, whatever. Steven wanted to join the military, but was unable to due to early onset arthritis affecting his hands. So instead, he volunteered for a secretive military experiment. Like I said, very much Captain America here, except for the problem being hand specific. And then the experiment was magic stuff. Rather than working on a chemical-based super soldier serum, this world's Dr. Erskine, whose fused half is never made clear, experimented with enchantments and mystical infusions, increasing Steven's physical capability and also just making him very good at magic immediately. The next chapter of the origin plays out about how you're familiar with. There was a Nazi spy in the testing facility, and while Steven was able to take him down, he could not do that before the spy shot Dr. Erskine, ensuring that while one magical super soldier was made, no others could be created as no one else knew the secrets of the procedure. Still, they had one, and Steven immediately became an American hero, nominated as Soldier Supreme by President Roosevelt and leading a small strike team called the Howling Commandos of Hoggoth, consisting of Dum Dum Fury, a fusion of Dum Dum Dugan and Nick Fury Sr. specifically, and Bucky Wong, who I shouldn't have to explain. As the Soldier Supreme, Steven has a wide variety of spells and abilities at his disposal, but his iconic power is still the Captain America shield. An energy shield, like one of those orange ones that Doctor Strange makes, but with the Captain America shield pattern on it. And I'm like 95% sure this is the reason why these two characters were chosen for an Infinity Warp, because like I've said and will say many more times, this whole universe runs on rule of cool, and this magic shield definitely qualifies. Though there could be another reason why these two were picked, and that is that, amazingly, this is kind of based on real-world history. Occult research was a thing that was absolutely happening during the actual World War II, though it was mostly the Nazis that were doing it, and they didn't find any success, at least not as far as I'm aware. The Axis powers of Warp World did seem to find some success, though, specifically in the form of their magical leader, Dormammu Red, a fusion of Red Skull and Dormammu himself, somehow, openly described on the page as Hitler's Priest of Hell. Dormammu Red and Soldier Supreme come to blows, obviously, though Steven is not able to take the win by himself, as it's revealed that his own magical ability is based on dark magic, and therefore Dormammu is immune to all of it. This is a cool twist, though it admittedly won't really go anywhere, but Soldier Supreme. That was an actual mistake. I think I'm gonna leave that in the video because, man, I'm gonna do that a lot in this one. Anyway, now that you know a little bit of the pain I'm going to go through recording this video where everyone has a very confusing name, Soldier Supreme is assisted in the fight against Dormammu Red by his old friend, Bucky Wong. But not a living Bucky Wong, not anymore. Bucky had perished in a previous encounter and was returned to life as a ghost. That's the Winter Soldier in this world. It is dead Bucky and Wong, which is once again very rule of cool. Now, we're going to see a pattern emerge very quickly from this first fight scene in the series, which is that Infinity Warp characters have their origins told to us very, very quickly. A lot of character beats are going to be crammed into a very short period of time, simply because there's not a lot of comics or space to fill out the narrative. That means that in the same combat that the Winter Soldier appears, this is also where Soldier Supreme gets the frozen in ice for decades bit. Yes, Soldier Supreme, much like one of his fused parts, is a man-out-of-time character, but this version is not simply going to get frozen. No, we get to throw a little bit more magical flair in there. In his dying moments, Dormammu Red exiles Stephen Rogers to the Dark Dimension, and that is where he's going to spend the next many years. He was returned to the mortal plane in the present day only by accident, as a group of cultists were attempting to summon Satan and apparently just mistargeted their spell. These cultists were led by a fusion of Baron Mordo and MODOK, otherwise known as Mordock, I gotta zoom into the page for this, mental organism ritually designed for the occult, not the last weird acronym we're gonna see in this video. This accidental summoning leads to a lot of things, but most immediately, one of the funniest pages I have ever read in any Marvel book. Audio listeners, just take a second and click over to the tab where you're listening to this. Trust me, this panel is going to be worth it. The rest of the original Soldier Supreme story is fairly straightforward. Stephen has a battle with Mordock and eventually takes him down, but then we get a little bit of narrative progression, as by channeling his magic through the all-seeing Eye of Agamotto, Soldier Supreme is the first person to figure out the true nature of Warp World. He knows who both Captain America and Doctor Strange are, and he is aware that he is a fusion of the two. This is a plot point that we will return to later, but for now that's all the Soldier Supreme we're going to get, and we move on to the next Infinity Warp. The super science-wielding fusion of Iron Man and Thor, Iron Hammer. Before I say anything else on this character, let me just take a second to appreciate the design because it's incredibly good. All of the Infinity Warps, most of the Infinity Warps look good, especially the main ones, but Iron Hammer has to be my second favorite out of the entire batch. He's also one of the easiest to summarize, mostly because his backstory is laid out very clearly on the page. The writing style of this comic is extremely different than the other ones, but that's very intentional in a very funny way. The character of Thor, Marvel's Thor at least, first appeared in a comic called Journey into Mystery, and Tony Stark first appeared in a book called Tales of Suspense. Iron Hammer's first appearance, then, is called Journey into Suspense, and it is written very intentionally with the dialogue and pacing of one of those early 60s comics. So, we quickly get introduced to Sigurd Stark, the billionaire technologist, the 5th richest man in Europe, and the 3rd best looking, and yet, for all that, he drinks alone. There is so much dialogue in the first couple pages of this comic, but at least it does lay out everything pretty clearly. Sigurd Stark is an amnesiac. 5 years before the present day, he just kind of woke up with no memory of his past, and yet, despite that, managed to build one of the best technology companies in the world out of nothing. His success means little to him, though, as he is constantly haunted by the fact he does not truly know who he is. Sigurd Stark is an emo boy who monologues non-stop about how sad he is. They actually acknowledge how funny this is in a later book. He was fused out of 2 party animals, and yet these apparently counteract each other and make a man who's just very depressed all the time. One day, while being depressed and walking through the woods during a blizzard, as depressed people do, I suppose, he was ambushed by a group of dark elves, led by the Crimson Curse, a fusion of Crimson Dynamo and Curse. Sigurd is poisoned by one of the elves' arrows, and is then captured by them as the elves recognize who he is, and hope that his technological genius can provide them with some new weaponry. It is the Iron Man origin, but just with elves instead. Keeping up that pattern, while captive, Stark meets a fusion of Atri the Dwarf and Ho Yinsen, and the two create a suit of enchanted armor for Sigurd that can both give him incredible strength and also keep the elves' enchanted poison from reaching his heart and finally killing him. So the heart thing is also part of this, but again, it's elves this time. Eitri ends up sacrificing himself to give Sigurd the time that he needs to suit up, and then as the Iron Hammer, he has his first fight scene against Crimson Curse and the Dark Elves, assisted by his onboard AI, the Heuristic Enhanced Imaging Macro-Digital Awareness for Logic and Logistics. Heimdall. I told you that Mordock was not the last acronym, and we're still not done. Also, at this point, if you're wondering whether this implies that Jarvis, or whatever Tony's onboard AI at the time happened to be, has a soul, and that's what Heimdall got fused with, don't worry about it. Rule of cool. Just anytime you're questioning anything from Infinity Warps, just think rule of cool and move on. And get ready to rule of cool handwave something else away immediately, because after his first victory, Ironhammer teleports to his next location using the Bridging Interdimensional Frequency Rotating Outside Space-Time, or Bifrost. Again, it's just don't think about it. It looks neat, and it's a Bifrost acronym. Whatever. Conveniently for both him and the reader, the moment that Sigurd enters the Bifrost, he immediately regains all of his memory, and we get a flashback scene explaining how he got to Earth in the first place, taking place in Asgard, and also giving us a whole bunch of other warps very quickly. This is the mostly Thor half of the warped origin. We learn that Sigurd Stark's real name is Stark Odinson, child of Howard Odin, the chief executive of the Aesir. There's a lot to unpack there. We don't get too much information on it, but it seems like in this world, the Asgardians are not really magical. They're like super tech with magic aesthetics. And apparently their royalty follows a business executive structure, so Howard Odin. Here we also meet Pepper, Rhodey, and Tony with an I, this is the daughter of Ho Yinsen, who are fused with the Warriors 3 to become the Warrior Machines 3. They're like a triplicate of other armor wearers based off of War Machine suits. And then, also in this throne room scene, we meet Zeke Stain. Zeke is the adopted brother of Stark Odinson, so you might be able to guess who he's fused with, except there's not really any Loki elements in his design or his character. He's just kind of weak and normal and boring, or as Stark himself says, weak, feeble, barely half a real person. Gee, I wonder if that's gonna be a plot point that comes up later. No way to know for sure. Anyway, now we get back to purely Thor stuff for a second. Outraged at his son's arrogance and ego, Howard Odin casts him down to Earth, stripping away his power and memory in the process so that he will learn humility by living among mortals. Then we get the 5-year time skip and we're back to the present. Most of the rest of the book is just a fight scene from here, as the Dark Elves who captured Sigurd were under the employ of Malekith. His name is just Malekith, they don't fuse anything there, but his character is a fusion of Malekith and the Mandarin, wielding the 10 realm rings instead of the normal 10 rings. Unsurprisingly, the fight ends with Ironhammer just bonking him real good. That is the only way that I can describe this page, but also, come on, look at this character's entire concept and tell me that we didn't need a full splash page bonking. Also worth noting that Malekith actually surrenders after this massive hit, and Ironhammer kills him anyway with a far more lethal bonk. So what we've learned here is that Ironhammer does not mess around. You know what he does mess around with, though? Women. Because this is a fusion of Thor and Tony Stark, so you better believe this man is a womanizer to his core, for better or for worse. It turns out that this entire time, Malekith was also working in service of a higher power, Madam Hel, a fusion of Hela and Madam Mask, a frequent Iron Man love interest. So you kinda know what happens from here. Despite her being one of the biggest villains, the comic does end with her and Ironhammer making out. We'll leave him there for now. He seems like he's doing fine, and that means we get to go to my favorite Infinity Warp, and it's not even remotely close. This is a character that I love to my core. I have multiple custom art commissions of him in my office. This is the fusion of Spider-Man and Moon Knight, Arachknight, which is the coolest name in the entire roster. He also has my favorite design out of all the fusions. Now that might just be my personal bias talking, I acknowledge that, but also I do think this design objectively rips. Marvel Rivals, please. Please, 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 please make it a skin. I think it would have to be a Moon Knight skin because of the cape, but I play Moon Knight anyway, so that's fine. Please, 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 please. Okay, I'll stop now. Now, Arachknight overall leans way more into the Spider-Man side of things than Moon Knight. Khonshu is not present here. There's actually very little Moon stuff going on at all. It is mostly the split personality aspect of Moon Knight that we see here. Regardless of that though, his origin is still incredibly dark, which is more in line with the Moon Knight stuff. His first comic begins with a flashback to a young Peter Parker walking home through Central Park with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, when suddenly the family is attacked by a large green monster, later revealed as the Goblin by Night, a fusion of Werewolf by Night and Green Goblin, who is functionally just kind of a green werewolf, but whatever. Both Ben and May are brutally murdered by the Goblin by Night, and Peter is about to join them as he lies bleeding out on the ground. But then he is saved by a mystical spider, possibly a Khonshu fusion, though this is never explicitly stated, who bites him and infuses him with spider totem energy. This spider bite gives him spider powers and also dissociative identity disorder. There is nowhere near as thorough of an explanation of the real mental condition as Moon Knight often gets, but whatever, this is an infinity warp, everything moves incredibly quickly. The book then flashes forward 15 years to adult Peter operating as Arachknight and fighting a villain named Michael Morpheus, a combination of Morbius and obscure Moon Knight foe Morpheus. This guy doesn't really matter, he's only in the book for 2 pages and mostly serves as somebody for Arachknight to almost kill. See, the main gimmick of this character is his alters, each of which actively serve a different purpose. Unlike Moon Knight's usual 3, Arachknight has 4, and most of them are based on different aspects of Peter throughout the years. These are broken down in an interesting way, as 2 of them are used for civilian life, and the other 2 are used for heroic things. I will describe them in terms of Dungeons & Dragons stats because that is a weirdly effective way to summarize the group. The first is Mr. Parker, or simply CEO Peter, who is the Charisma stat alter. This one seems to be based on Peter Parker in his Parker Industries era, where he is a suave and capable CEO, handling most business interactions and also relations with his girlfriend, Marley Jane Watson, a fusion of MJ and Marlene Alron, who is Moon Knight's love interest. There seems to also be a little bit of Stephen Grant in this persona, as he is a lot more cool than Peter ever is, and to be clear for the MCU watchers, I mean comic Stephen, not MCU Stephen. Those 2 are very, very different. The other civilian identity is Science Peter. This one is based on Peter's high school status quo. This is where all of his genius intelligence is. He cares about science and experimenting and making the Arachknight gadgets. And that's basically all that he cares about. Every other form of interaction has to be handled by one of the other alters. Both of those are more or less Peter, but the heroic identities are more directly based on the identities of Spider-Man and Moon Knight as heroes. The first hero identity is simply called the Spider, and he is, for all intents and purposes, Spider-Man. He is the with great power comes great responsibility, nice, quippy type hero. And then on the other side, you have the Knight, who is far more brutal and violent and good at finishing fights and doing what needs to be done, even if Peter Parker Spider-Man would be more conflicted about it. I'll roughly call these 2 the dexterity and strength stats respectively, meaning that Peter has pretty much all of them covered except for wisdom and constitution, but constitution is a weird stat anyway. As you would kind of expect from the fact that so much of these comics has to be devoted to the dynamic between Arachknight's different alters, the actual plot of his 2 issues is extremely straightforward, and deals with Goblin by Night's real identity as Norman Osborn. Even in Warp World, Peter is best friends with Harry Osborn, and Harry knows all about Peter's Arachknight stuff and his dad's whole goblin thing, but he's been keeping the goblin situation a secret from Peter, and when Peter finds out, Arachknight goes on a bit of a rampage. There actually is a pretty nice moment at the end of this where Peter's Knight identity is about to murder Norman once and for all, but then Harry steps in, telling Peter that the Goblin by Night identity is not something that Norman has taken on willingly and is instead a magical werewolf-esque curse. This means that while Norman's murdering of Ben and May was not justified by any means, it was at the very least not conscious, and if Peter chooses to kill Norman then and there, then he would be consciously depriving somebody else of their parents, and that would make him just as bad, if not worse. This is a good endpoint, and it is something that I would like to see followed up on a little bit more. But then, immediately after this speech, it turns out that the Goblin by Night curse is somehow genetic, and it immediately passes on to Harry, and he turns into a goblin and flies away, and then the comic is just over. Arachknight, while very cool in concept, does have one of the least satisfying endings of the Infinity Warps. All the others kind of come to a conclusion. This one does end on a cliffhanger that is never resolved. But whatever, I am willing to excuse a little bit of writing jank on the strength of Arachknight's design alone, because, say it with me, rule of cool. Everything in the Infinity Warps universe just runs on that concept foundationally, and that is not stopping yet. We are, though, now over halfway through the main roster of this event, and the next one is metal as hell. This is Weapon Hex, a fusion of Wolverine, Laura Kinney Wolverine specifically, and Scarlet Witch. Weapon Hex, or Hex 23 as her creators call her, is a person born for a very specific purpose, that being as a mortal host for the demon Mephichthon, who seems, from the name alone, to be a fusion of Mephisto and Chthon. The cult attempting this ritual was led by Dr. Sarah Kinney, a fusion of presumably Laura Kinney's mom and somebody else, though we don't know too much about her, and Dr. Herbert Wyndham, a fusion of the High Evolutionary and the Demon Blackheart. After many failed attempts with artificially created, genetically perfected subjects, these two masterminds realized that the genetic perfection might actually be the flaw causing the ritual to fail. For a demon to inhabit the host, it needs to have some sort of flaw to it. And therefore, the two leaders of the cult decided to have a kid themselves for the express purpose of getting her possessed by a demon. You can kinda guess where the story is going from here. It's a very tropey one, but a fun comic regardless. After their daughter, who they name Laura, is born, Sarah Kinney grows attached to the child and changes her mind on forging her into being a living weapon, while her dad stays committed to the demonic cause and tries to go through with the ritual regardless. This leads to Laura being raised in two worlds, trained for evil purposes by her father, but then also ingrained with some human elements and actual empathy by her mother, also getting trained in combat by Hellhound, a fusion of magic and Sabretooth, who is criminally underused in this comic. I think she's real cool, but she's barely in it. In her role as Weapon Hex, Laura is also infused with chaos magic, usually channeled through her claws in the form of anime-style named special moves, all of which are hex puns, like Hexorcism or Hexision, and most importantly, Hex Marks the Spot. Hex Marks the Spot is not a spell used by Laura, but more often by someone wishing to control her, usually her father. When the spell is cast, it marks a target and forces Weapon Hex to go into a brutal, mindless rage, killing whoever was hit by the spell, regardless of any other factors in play. This spell's existence ends up being the inciting incident for Laura's rebellion, and is also where the comic gets really dark for a minute, as when Laura's mother begins standing up to the cult more and more, Laura's father casts Hex Marks the Spot on Sarah Kinney, forcing Laura to murder her own mom in cold blood. Dear Lord. Weapon Hex then goes on a fairly justified murder spree throughout the castle, and learns in the process that she has a secret younger sister, engineered as a backup plan in case Hex 23 did not work out properly. This is Gavril Kinney, a fusion of Laura's clone younger sister Gabby Kinney and Quicksilver. There was a Scarlet Witch, of course there was going to be a Quicksilver in here. Gavril prefers to go by the superhero codename Speed Weasel, which is a stupid name, but an intentionally stupid one, because she's a child who picked that name for herself. And there's a running gag throughout the comic that whenever she meets somebody with a name she thinks is cooler, she tries to change her own name to match. Speed Weasel is cute, she's fun, she's a little bit of levity in this otherwise extremely metal and hardcore comic. Anyway, then Weapon Hex wins by casting a hexromancy spell to call upon the spirits of everyone Dr. Wyndham killed, who then tear him to pieces. This includes Laura's mother, so Dr. Wyndham dies by getting slashed in half by the ghost of his wife and then brutalized by all of the monsters that he sacrificed. I told you, it's metal. Also, not to get too power scaly, but this is also a cool moment, so I want to show it. It seems like Weapon Hex's healing factor is way better than those of her component parts, as at one point, Dr. Wyndham obliterates her with lightning magic and turns her into a pile of ash, and then she healing factor regenerates from that, which has some implications about the other things that she can tank. And with Weapon Hex addressed, we are at the last of the main Infinity Warps cast, Ghost Panther. Once again, very obvious who it is from the name and appearance alone. This is a fusion of Black Panther and Ghost Rider. Though Ghost Panther does feel a little bit different reading the comic, this one reads less like a fusion and more like a T'Challa what-if story. But regardless, it's still cool, and that's the only box these comics need to check. Ghost Panther is still T'Challa. No name fusion here, at least not yet. We'll get to that in just a second. His early life seems to be pretty similar to that of the main universe T'Challa, though he is a little bit more arrogant than the one that we know, to such an extent that he argued with his father so much that he was exiled from Wakanda and made his way to America to make a new life. This new life ended up being as a motorcycle stunt rider, during which he would take on the stage name of Johnny Blaze. So you see what I mean about this one reading more like a what-if than a fusion, though things will get weirder as we move on. T'Challa ends up dying during a tragic motorcycle crash, but instead of going directly to the afterlife, ends up in a sort of liminal space where he is confronted by Zarathos, a seeming fusion of the spirit of vengeance that empowers Ghost Rider and Sekhmet, sister of Bast, though this is never explicitly stated. They kind of dance around who this is, which is fitting for a spirit of vengeance if you've seen my Ghost Rider video. This seems like a pretty straightforward devil deal setup, but what makes it more interesting is that T'Challa rejects the demon's offer, refusing to hunt souls and become a spirit of vengeance. And then he gets resurrected from this limbo space regardless by his motorcycle riding mentor, who just so happens to be a fusion involving Jericho Drum, Dr. Voodoo. He then doesn't really matter for the rest of the comic. He was just around to revive T'Challa and then move on, I guess. Shortly after his resurrection, T'Challa is called back to Wakanda. Not on a happy occasion, though. He's called because his father has perished in battle against two villains who complicate the lore of Ghost Panther quite a bit. See, most of the other Infinity Warps are fusions of two well-known characters, with occasionally a joke or bit thrown in there, but Ghost Panther took a different direction with it, blending notable Wakanda villains with characters from Killraven. And I guarantee you most people watching this video have never heard of Killraven. I do not have time to go into Killraven in detail today, but to give you the bare minimum that you need to know, Killraven is an obscure hero from an early 70s comic simply titled Amazing Adventures. He is a regular human named Jonathan Raven from an alternate future timeline in which Martians invade Earth, at which point he is forced to become a gladiator in the Martian arenas, where he takes on the name Killraven. For some reason, the writer of Ghost Panther decided to fuse Eric Killmonger with Killraven, becoming Eric Killraven. And also, I know what the some reason was. This comic was written by Jed MacKay, and I mean this with all the love I can muster, but Jed MacKay is famous for taking his random weird favorites from decades past and then shoving them into books wherever he can. That's not a complaint. He does this really well, and I genuinely respect it. But yeah, the only reason Killraven is referenced here is that it's probably just a character Jed MacKay liked. Killraven is joined by M'Baku, who is a fusion of M'Baku and another Killraven character named M'Shula. Easy fusion there, their names are somewhat similar with the M apostrophe at the beginning. And despite them coming from a very random place, their origin, or half-origin, as Killraven characters is incredibly relevant to the Ghost Panther plot, as the future Martian invasion of Earth is the two's villain origin story. When the Martians invaded, Wakanda was the one place that managed to resist their control and remain free. But the families of Eric Killraven and Mabak Shula had been exiled from the nation shortly before this for unknown reasons. This meant that they had to grow up under Martian oversight, which left them very bitter towards the nation that had cast them out. In their adulthood, they find a way to time travel back to the past and use this technology to try and destroy Wakanda so that everyone there will have to suffer the way that they did. They could use the time travel to maybe like warn people about the Martians or whatever, but hey, they're villains, so they're gonna do the evil thing. Rule of cool. Take a shot every time I say rule of cool in this video. Actually don't, you might die. To this end, they killed King T'Chaka in the present, which is why T'Challa returned to Wakanda for his funeral. Now we've finally looped back around to that. While in Wakanda, he reunites with his sister, Shuri, who, yes, is a fusion of Shuri and Riri Williams, one that was probably only done for the name. She does seem to be a superhero in her own right. She does mention on one panel that she's built something called the Panther heart armor, but we never actually get to see her suit up. The one who does do all the fighting is T'Challa, who tries to battle the future invaders and fails, resisting the call of Zarathos several times until he eventually accepts and becomes the Ghost Panther officially, taking on the soul-devouring role of a spirit of vengeance. He doesn't get a motorcycle yet though, and actually will never get one, because instead he gets a ride that is 10 times weirder. See, in all the shots where T'Challa was rejecting the call of Zarathos, there was a shadowy figure in the background constantly pleading for mercy on behalf of the Wakandan prince, and this turned out to be the spirit of King T'Chaka. When T'Challa finally accepts the role of Ghost Panther, T'Chaka begs Zarathos to allow him to help his son and is reincarnated as a giant flaming panther. And that's what Ghost Panther rides. He doesn't have a flaming motorcycle, he has a big fire cat that's actually his dad. And then the comic is just kind of over. Again, all of these characters get their whole origin and first story told in a mere 2 issues. So from this shot where T'Chaka gets revived, there's like 2 pages of fight scene and then 1 page of conclusion where they're all looking over Wakanda, and then that's it. It's not a cliffhanger, this is a real conclusion where they're going to be the defenders of the nation going forward, but I guess T'Challa's just running around on top of his cat dad forever. Sure. I don't know if that one counts as rule of cool, more rule of weird, but whatever, same thing. And not only is that the end of the Ghost Panther comic, it's also the end of the core Infinity Warps roster. These 5 are the only ones that would get their own self-titled comic. We're done with them for now. We will be returning to this main cast later, but the self-titled 2-shots are not the only comics that dropped in this original batch. There were also 2 issues released simply called Infinity Warps, no character subtitle on them, and these are full of the silly ones. Each of these comics has 3 mini-stories in them, so if you thought 2 issues per character was quick, now they are getting 1/6 of that, which is nice for me because it means I get to run through them far quicker. The first Infinity Warps anthology opens up with, well, technically not a full story. It starts with a 1-page narration gag as a nod to Marvel's older What If comics, starring Observer X, a fusion of the Watcher and Professor X, who is going to be the one guiding us through these weird little stories. The first full mini-comic is Moon Squirrel and Tippy Sore. This is another one that I don't think I should have to explain to you conceptually. It is Moon Girl and Squirrel Girl, and Tippy Toe the Squirrel, and Devil Dinosaur. It is exactly what you think it is. Moon Squirrel, real name Lunine Lafagreen, they get a lot funnier with the names in these tiny ones, is Moon Squirrel, a genius child with the ability to communicate with squirrels. And also, she has a giant squirrel as a pet. This is never really explained, she's just kind of around, which is appropriate for the fusion of these characters. Their villain is also appropriate, because for anyone who doesn't know, the Squirrel Girl has a repeated history of defeating some of the best villains in Marvel single-handedly. That's like her whole bit. So who are you gonna throw against Moon Squirrel and Tippy Sore but Dr. Doomactus? Yeah, it's Dr. Doom and Galactus in one guy. She doesn't defeat him with raw power, though. No, no, no. This is Moon Girl, so she's going to have to outsmart him. And it's also Moon Girl and Squirrel Girl, so she is specifically going to outsmart him in a silly way. And that means sticking a secret translator onto his helmet, which takes all of the panicked screams of the people he's trying to kill and translates them automatically into praise, telling Doomactus how cool everyone thinks he is. And then Dr. Doomactus ends up liking the planet so much because they all think he's great that he leaves Earth alone and doesn't kill anybody. And that is the whole story. Like I said, this next batch is mini comics. These are only about 6 pages long each, though this one does end with a fake cliffhanger where Moon Squirrel and Tippy are going to fight Ratmaster, who seems to be a fusion of Ratatosker and Taskmaster. He's only on this one panel. Again, this is a gag and not a real follow-up, but still, Ratmaster is canon. That's nice. Moving on to the next one, we have a team-up between 2 fused characters, the first being Green Widow, a fusion of Black Widow and She-Hulk, and the second being Cat's Eye, a fusion of Hawkeye and Hellcat. I don't really have a lot to say about this one. It is kind of just a fight scene. They go up against Iron Titania, who is a fusion of Titania, and I'm actually realizing as I record this, I don't know who she's supposed to be fused with. It just says Iron Titania on the page. Let me see if I can find that out. Okay, well, I did some digging, and the Marvel Wiki says that she is apparently a warp between Iron Maiden and Titania. But I've never seen the wiki say apparently like that before, and also there is nothing cited, so I can't fact check it. Maybe she's a fusion between Iron Maiden and Titania, I'm not sure, but I don't have any other information to go on, so that's just what I'm gonna say. Like I said, this mini-comic is basically just a fight, so I don't have much more to say about it. That means we can move on to the next, and this one is great. This one is the Terrific 2, which is in fact a Fantastic Four fusion. The Terrific 2 have condensed the Fantastic Four into a pair of brothers, Ben and Reed Storm. Reed Storm is a combination of Mr. Fantastic and Invisible Woman, becoming simply Mr. Invisible, and Ben Storm is Human Torch and The Thing, becoming Hot Rocks. Their origin is shot for shot the same as the Fantastic Four, though. It's just that there are 2 of them instead of the full roster. And also in this universe, Ben gets screwed over even more than in the main one. He's now a flaming rock monster, and Reed just kind of has 2 cool superpowers with no drawbacks. In their comic, they fight Master Mole, a fusion of Mole Man and the Master Mold, which is a machine that generates Sentinels. As you'd expect from that combination, Master Mole then commands an underground army of Moloid-shaped Sentinels, which look surprisingly cool. I thought they were gonna look stupid, but I kinda like this design a lot, actually. Ultimately, the Terrific 2 are some of the most similar to their original non-fused forms. They are kind of just the Fantastic Four, but only half of them. The only other thing worth noting in this comic is that we do get to hear Hot Rocks' catchphrase, which is, for some reason, quote, "It's Blazerin' time?" Come on, you could have come up with something better than that. Then there are 3 more of these mini-comic fusions in the second issue of the Infinity Warps special. This one also has a narration open, not by the Professor X Watcher fusion though, and instead by Forever Bushman, a combination of Eternity and Forbushman, who is a character I also do not have time to go over today, but he's kind of just a guy named Irving Forbush who wears a pot on his head and is weird and has complicated background, and now he's fused with the universe itself. He's only around for 2 pages, I'm not going to spend more time on him. Opening with Forbushman in this comic is very appropriate though, because Infinity Warps issue 2 has, I think, the weirdest fusions of the entire roster. Starting off strong with Kamala Kang, a fusion of Miss Marvel and Kang the Conqueror. Kamala Kang has the power to stretch through time now. That's her whole bit. She is still a stretchy character, but now she stretches into the 4th dimension, I suppose. Which is a very fun concept. Unfortunately, it kind of goes nowhere. Even for a mini-comic, this one is extremely abrupt. She tries to do a time travel thing and messes up the timeline and ends up confronting a bunch of different timeline versions of herself all stretching through time at once, and then it's just over. It is as abrupt as I described it right there. This one is weird, fun concept, but poor execution, sadly. Oh, but the next one's gonna be cute though. We have a Power Pack fusion. For anyone who's not familiar with Power Pack, they are some of Marvel's best kid-friendly superheroes. They've kind of fallen out of favor, sadly, in recent years, but back a few decades ago, they were really popular. They are a family of superpowered siblings who go on nice, wholesome adventures, and oh my god, they fused with the Punisher. They're the Punisher Pack. Marvel, what the hell? This has gotta be the wildest gag from the entire Infinity Warps event. In Warp World, the parents of Power Pack were killed by alien gangsters, and when the kids were given powers, they used them to take revenge, and then just kept on killing criminals in the spirit of Frank Castle. They are murder vigilantes, and also still children. And if you're questioning how the one soul of Frank Castle got bonded to these 4 children and how exactly that math works out, you know what the answer's gonna be. You've heard me say it enough by now. Then we reach the final fusion of this set, which is another hilarious one, but in a very different way. This is Diamond Patch, a combination of Emma Frost and Wolverine, which is a fusion I think both of them would be disgusted with for very different reasons. Diamond Patch is a crime boss and scammy motivational speaker, who is also, of course, a mutant with diamond claws that he can read minds with if he jams them into somebody. Despite being just as short as the others, Diamond Patch's comic is incredibly dense as it cuts between 3 different scenes. First off, Patch giving an inspirational speech to a crowded auditorium, and then 2 different fights against various X-villains. First off, Firebelly, a fusion of Pyro and Toad, and then Deathstreak, a combination of Mystique and Lady Deathstrike. Then the mini-comic anthologies come to a close, and we are almost done with the first batch of Infinity Warp's characters, though there is one more mini-series which adds a couple more. The Infinity Wars Sleepwalker tie-in, which means hooray, I get to talk about my favorite obscure Blorbo in this video. For anyone who does not know who Sleepwalker is, go watch my other video on him so that you can find out why he's great. That's not a suggestion, that's an order. In fact, I might need to do another Sleepwalker video at some point, because that was one of the first videos I made on this channel, and I hadn't really dived into the super long form content yet, so I could talk about him for 3 times as long if I wanted to. To restrain myself and give you the bare minimum that you need to know about Sleepwalker for today's topic, he is a being from the Mindscape, a criminally underused psychic realm that exists kind of adjacent to the Marvel Universe. The Mindscape can be accessed through the Mind Stone, and apparently its connection to a different Infinity Stone meant that when Gamora did the whole Warp World thing, the inhabitants of the Mindscape were not affected. So Sleepwalker did not get any fusion, but his best friend and bonded human, Rick Sheridan, did. See my other video for more information on this, but Sleepwalker is psychically connected to the mind of Rick Sheridan, and when he was fused, it messed up their connection. So Sleepwalker went on a journey throughout the Infinity Stones trying to reach Rick, separate him from the fusion, and save everybody that he could. On the way, he meets a couple more fusions, all of whom are fairly minor narratively, but also interesting enough in concept to be worth mentioning here. The first of them is Dark Starhawk, who is a fusion of Starhawk and Darkhawk, guessably from the name as most of these are. Then, keeping up the trend of wild names, there is Man Thing Thang Thoom. Take a guess, it's Man Thing and Fin Fang Foom, turned into this big swamp dragon. Next, there's the Headman, a fusion of Hulk villain, the Leader, and Ant-Man villain, Egghead. He's not that interesting, he's only on the page for a couple of panels, but the presence of a fused Ant-Man and Hulk villain implies the presence of a fused Ant-Man and Hulk. This is Little Monster. Little Monster, otherwise known as Scott Banner, was a regular, mild-mannered scientist until he was shot by a gamma-powered Pym particle beam, turning him into an irradiated creature that gets stronger and smaller as he gets angrier. How small can he get, you might be wondering? Well, the main Little Monster story that we get involves him shrinking down so much that he has a punch-out brawl with bacteria. God, I love the Infinity Warps event so much. Every bullshit idea that they had, they put onto the page, and I respect them so much for it. Returning from the weird fused quantum realm to Sleepwalker's journey though, where was he going for all of it? After all, he was trying to find the fused Rick, so who was the other half of that fusion? Well, you can guess it pretty easily if I just tell you the name. He was looking for Colonel Rick Fury. Yeah, way back at the beginning of this video, I mentioned that there was a Nick Fury fusion, but specifically called attention to the fact that it was Nick Fury Sr. This is where Nick Fury Jr. ended up. Most people got fused with other superheroes. He just got fused with random guy Rick Sheridan. He is the commander not of S.H.I.E.L.D., but of the Security Level Extreme Elimination Protocol. One more nonsense acronym for the books. He's the commander of SLEEP, which best I can tell has nothing to do with actual sleep as a concept, but hey, whatever. Rule of cool again. Man, I really have said rule of cool quite a bit in this video already. Would you believe me if I said we haven't even gotten to most of it yet? No, the rule of cool is going to triple down with the next part of the video, all about what became of Warp World after this event was over. Of course, Warp World was not a permanent thing. Marvel was not going to leave everybody as these weird fusions trapped in the Soul Stone forever, and the one who did the most work towards restoring normalcy was Loki. Finally time to pay off something from way back in the Iron Hammer section. Remember how Zeke Stane was around, and he was just Zeke Stane, and he wasn't fused with anybody, and that left him sort of weird and half-formed? Yeah, from a cosmic perspective, he was supposed to be fused with Loki. But Loki, being who he is, he weaseled his way out of it. Due to a sort of failed scheme that ended up working out in the gods' favor, Loki got sent into the Soul Stone before Gamora did the fusion, meaning that his soul did not get blended with all of the others. This left him fully aware of the natural state of everything, and it was Loki's actions who led to the unfusing of several characters, forming a weird makeshift Avengers team who eventually took Gamora down and restored everybody to their natural lives. But that leaves a weird question that some of you might have thought and others might not have. If everybody got restored to normal, what happened to the fusions? See, the fusions had their own lives. They were their own independent entities, at least in a way. None of them had memories of their previous existences. They were all unique beings. And it wasn't really fair to just obliterate their universe in favor of restoring the old one. And so what happened is that Warp World continued to exist. Adam Warlock, historically the best wielder of the Soul Stone, was about to just kind of fix everything, but then Soldier Supreme confronted him, presenting this question of fairness, and so Warlock just kind of created a copy of every soul and then restored things to normal while also leaving Warp World intact within the Soul Stone. Does this make sense canonically? No, but you know what I'm gonna say to that. So Warp World and all the fusions are still around. They still exist in Marvel canon, they're just locked in their own little pocket dimension within the Soul Stone somehow. And that means that Marvel had the ability to revisit these worlds in future comics. And you bet they did. We're now done with Infinity Warps. Enter the follow-up event, Secret Warps. Secret Warps is a much shorter comic. This was only 5 issues, and yet somehow, in those 5 issues alone, it introduces like 25 new fused characters. But fear not, for both my sanity and yours, these are going to be much quicker. And the reason for that is that they are also much more stupid. Secret Warps was even more of a gimmick comic than Infinity Warps was. If Infinity Warps was just the creators playing around and having fun, this was them, I don't know, doing a bunch of drugs and then playing around and having fun. The first gimmick in the first half of the event is a multiverse bit. Somehow, not going to worry about canon here, it just happens and I'm not entirely sure how, but I'm not going to question it. Warp World has split into an entire multiverse of fusion worlds called the Mergiverse. Yeah, that's on brand. If you thought that Infinity Warps was densely packed with characters and plot points, you ain't seen nothing yet. There's a magic arc right at the beginning where Dormammu Red and Herbert Wyndham come back, and to fight them, the heroes team up with US Archmage, who is a fusion of Obscure Sorcerer Kalu and US Agent. The fight against these magic villains then messes with the timeline, causing another new character, Captain Peace, to arrive from the future. Captain Peace is a fusion of Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, and Justice Peace, who is one of the leaders of the TVA. To save the future, Captain Peace sends Ghost Panther forward in time to the year 2099, where we get to meet a bunch of 2099 fusions too. We have Arachknight 2099, who is a combination of Miguel O'Hara and Ravage, Ghost Panther 2099, who is White Tiger, and Ghost Rider 2099. Iron Hammer 2099 is a combination of Thor 2099 and Iron Man 2020, so they went with a different future timeline Iron Man for this one. Then Weapon Hex 2099, who's just an entirely different combination. This is Hulk 2099 and Doctor Strange 2099 turned into a Gamma Sorcerer. And then finally for this roster, we have Soldier Supreme 2099, who is a combination of Danielle Cage, daughter of Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, who becomes Captain America in a couple future timelines, and Nico Minoru, sorcerer and user of the Staff of One, though of course in this fusion, she uses the Shield of One instead. The 2099 fusions are only around for like half an issue at most. The timeline crisis gets fixed pretty quickly. And then gets worse again, because different realities of the Mergiverse start crashing into each other, leading to another entire team of combinations. This is the Supreme 7, a combination of the Squadron Supreme, or at least one of the many iterations of the Squadron Supreme, and DP7, another group that most of you have never heard of. Okay, very, very quick backstory on DP7. In the 80s, Marvel tried this initiative called New Universe, which was, I mean, it should be obvious, it was an attempt to create a new universe. Not replacing the Marvel one as we know it, but creating a separate one that they published alongside the main comics with an entirely new roster of characters. It was not super popular, and while a few characters have made their way from the new universe to the main one, it wasn't a lot, and most of the new universe things have been entirely forgotten. Except for in Secret Warps, apparently, where they fused the main new universe superhero team with the Squadron Supreme, leading to fusions that nobody will recognize. DP7 is such a random pull that I'm not even gonna bother listing off the fused parts for this. I'll put them on the screen for anybody who cares. You can pause the video and read if you're one of the people who cares about New Universe. But the Supreme 7 members consist of Blurrer, Codename Eagle, Dr. Justice, Hawkmask, Hyperbrand, Megalodon, and Princess Powerhouse. Why am I going so fast and just blasting through these characters at rapid speed now? Well, it's because of what's about to happen. If you think that this comic has jumped the shark already, now the fusions are gonna double. That's right, the collapse of the Mergiverse caused by all these universes crossing over into each other fuses the characters again, turning the 2-in-1s into 4-in-1s. With the warps warped and the fusions fused, we have characters like Ghost Hammer, who is a combination of Ghost Panther and Iron Hammer. Also, Spider Supreme, a combination of Soldier Supreme and Arachknight. Captain Peace gets a fusion because they needed an extra one to make the math work out, resulting in Weapon Peace, who is Captain Peace and Weapon Hex. Even the Supreme 7 get in on this nonsense mashup. We end up with Eagle Mask, Rush, Mr. Magnolodon, and the incredibly named Dr. Hyperjustice. And we're not done. Of course we're not done. There is a Fantastic Four and Terrific 2 fusion. You know they're gonna combine those and reduce the number by half again. We get Wonderful One, who's just kind of Super Skrull but better. I do have to point out some of his lore because it's really funny. Wonderful One is canonically an egomaniac because he's made up of 4 people that love each other, so naturally he loves himself. Then there's Moon Weasel, who is Moon Squirrel and Speed Weasel combined. Their sidekick is Little Tippy-Sore, who is Little Monster and Tippy-Sore, which again, I should just remind you, is Devil Dinosaur, Tippy-Toe, Ant-Man, and Hulk all in one thing. And who would all these quad fusions fight but equally bullshit quad-fused villains, specifically Mephixaroneg the Tomorrow Demon and Dr. Dumactigo the Stranger Planet? I'll leave it to you to figure out who the fusions of these are. Some are more obvious than others. So how do we fix this? How do we untangle this absolute mess of everything? Well, naturally, we just gotta keep fusing. Eventually, if we fuse enough characters, we will reach somebody with enough cosmic power that they can unravel this warp world mess from the inside. And that's exactly what happens. One more fusion takes place, giving us Hammer Supreme, which is, let me pick up my physical comic and double check the roster here so I don't get it wrong. Black Panther, Ghost Rider, Captain America, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Moon Knight, Iron Man, and Thor, all in one dude. Now at this point, I need to take a second and make something abundantly clear so that people don't misunderstand what all of this is going for. This is a joke comic. Everything that they're doing, all the jumping the shark nonsense and way too much crammed into one single event, that is the point. This comic, while stupid, is incredibly self-aware about it. When the final fusion happens, there's a panel of all the characters breaking down and panicking because not even they can unravel their own convoluted backstories. It's hilarious. With the final fusion established now, only one question remains. Well, okay, a lot of questions remain, but only one remains that's going to get answered. Why? Why was all this chaos happening in the Mergiverse? What caused things to start breaking down? And the answer is Zeke Stane again. Zeke Stane was the one force in this entire multiverse that didn't have his other half. His mere presence was like a weird black hole that was causing everything to cascade and shatter. And the way that they fix this is with Hammer Supreme using all of his abilities to bind Zeke's soul to the hammer, which, by the way, is called Mjolnir. I don't think I ever said that up until now. With Zeke's soul absence finally rectified, the universe returns to normal. Still the warp world normal, of course. All of them are still the 2-in-1 fusions, but I mean, at this point, with the depths that we've been to, 2-in-1 fusions seem incredibly normal, don't they? This brings Secret Warps to a close with another teaser, though this one is probably a joke. I don't think Marvel ever intended to pay this one off. But also, who knows what they're planning to do with this universe, so maybe they will. In the final pages of the comic, it's revealed that there's another secretive evil force out in space who's been watching the chaos on Earth this entire time. And that ominous being is a fusion of Thanos and Korvac named Corvos the God Titan. Will Corvos ever actually show up and do things? I have absolutely no idea. The Infinity Warped characters have shown up in cameos and various side media on occasion, but have not gotten another mainline series yet, though I kind of think it's only a matter of time. And now we're almost done. We're really, really close, but I did promise that I was going to cover every Infinity Warp, and fulfilling that promise requires me to do one more thing. There is a whole other group of Infinity Warp's characters who are even more minor than the ones I've already covered. A few who were introduced in side storylines at the end of the Secret Warps issues, and many more who are gags for a single page or even a single panel. I don't really have a lot to say about these, but for the sake of the promise, I do need to mention them. So I'm going to do it in slideshow form. I'll play some funny music and run through all of them with their names and their combinations on the screen. So here we go, cue the slideshow. And now we're done. Finally, truly, there's no more fusions, I promise. We have actually reached all of them. All, what was it, like 80 or so? I'm not gonna go back and count because I'm tired of this. Look, I love Infinity Warps and Warp World as a concept. It was a really stupid idea that the creators just committed so heavily to that it kind of looped back around to being cool again. I don't even really know how to conclude this video because I don't need to summarize what the last hour has been about. I've said it a lot. This is all just rule of cool nonsense. They went, what if we put the two characters into one character? And then did that 40 times and then decided to do it even more. On this channel, I typically cover the deep lore, and I've never been one to shy away from the silly concepts and just let fun comics be fun comics, but I try to go as deep as I can. I'll talk about the production and the real background behind the characters. Sometimes, though, there just isn't any of that. Sometimes a comic is what it is because being what it is very fun. Infinity Warps is maybe the pinnacle of that. I've made more in-depth philosophical rule of cool comments on this channel before, specifically in my Ghost Rider video, and this outro is admittedly going to be very similar to that. But whatever, saying rule of cool is the only way I could possibly end the Infinity Warps video. Sometimes a comic is made because the creators have an interesting and compelling story that they want to put onto the page so that people can read and enjoy and maybe learn something from it. And sometimes a comic is made because a creator thinks, what if we put two guys into one guy, and then it spirals into this. And you know what? I love both just as much in the right situations. Rule of cool works for me. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, I do hope you enjoyed. I'm gonna take you all behind the scenes of my production really quick because I need everyone to understand just how wild this video was to make. I recorded this entire thing in one sitting, and also, I don't use a script. All of my work is entirely unscripted. I just have the comics open, and I read them, and I do my research, and I talk as I do it. So just think how it was for me spending the last many hours reading these books and then vomiting it all into my mic at once. I feel like I've been fused with 7 other people. That's how chaotic my brain is at the moment. If you want to toss me a couple bucks as payment for losing all of my sanity here and also get some fun exclusives out of it, I do have a Patreon. If you go over there, you can find early and ad-free access to all of my work, as well as an exclusive video every month. There are over 7 hours of Patreon exclusives over there and counting. My username there is the exact same as it is here. You can also find a link to it in the description of this video and on my channel page. It's very easy to find. And all jokes aside, extra double thank you to the people who already support me over there. It really does help me keep making these videos for you guys. And final shout out to Ruben Perez, the artist I work with for these videos. If you're a fan of Ruben's art and the work he does on this channel, stay tuned because at some point in the next couple videos, you're gonna see a couple more poses arriving into the rotation. I actually did a community pose vote on my Patreon just a bit ago, so you'll get to see the winner of that soon. And now, with what I believe is a new record for amount of time I've recorded in a single session, I'm going to go directly to sleep. Thank you all for watching again. Warp World, I love you, but my God, you are insane to talk about.